Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the next webinar in our series, Bringing Data to Life. My name is Eleanor, and I'll be hosting today's webinar. Thank you so much for joining us today for a beginner's webinar on population statistics. Before we start, we'd like to remind you all that the webinars in this series will be recorded and will be available on YouTube after the event. The slides and recordings for our previous webinars are now available on the ONS website. Everyone signed up to today's webinar will receive a link once today's recording is available, and you'll also receive an email this afternoon with links to any of the tools and articles that are mentioned today. If you are using the Microsoft Teams app and you would like to turn on live actions for this webinar, please click the More button at the top of your screen. For those who haven't used this before, it's the button with 3 dots to the left of your camera button. Once you've clicked More, scroll down to Languages and Speech, and then you'll be able to select the Show Live options. The chat function is closed today, and you're welcome to submit questions through Slido. I'll cover this more in just a moment. This webinar series is for everyone, so please share the recording and slides when they're available and join the conversation on socials using the hashtag statistics for the public good. Lastly, you will be invited to complete a short survey at the end of the webinar, and we really welcome your feedback on this webinar series and the statistics we produce at ONS. So the session today is interactive with questions for you, and you'll be able to ask questions to our speakers throughout the event. You'll have time to answer. We'll have time at the end to answer as many questions as possible in our Q&A section after the presentations. Please join in by either scanning the QR code on your screen or heading over to slido.com and using the hashtag BDTLpopulation. Don't worry if you can't get to Slido quick enough, the code will be at the bottom of every slide. If you're using the desktop Microsoft Teams app, you can also click the S button, which is the Slido button at the top of your screen, and Slido will also appear that way. I'm delighted to introduce our speakers today. First, we'll hear from Ollie Dorman from the ONS. Ollie will explain how we count the population, giving you a beginner's guide to our methods. We'll also explain the different outputs and how you can look at population changes over time in your area. We're also pleased to be joined by Sam Maud from the Department for Work and Pensions, who will share how ONS population data helps DWP to understand the demographic challenges ahead in order to be better equipped to take demographics into account, whether that be modelling and forecasting, policy development or operations. Thank you once again for joining, and I'll now hand over to Ollie to get us started.
Thank you very much for that, Eleanor. So as it says here, I'm Ollie Dorman and I work in ONS's Demography division. So I'm going to be talking you through today our population estimates. So at the core of all population estimates for all the UK countries is the cohort component method. So I've just said population estimates rather than just population, and that's because we know that the numbers we produce are not a perfect measure. They're our best view of a complex changing picture. So in a simple view, we start at the left of this slide with the population at time t, and we work our way right and then down. So we start with the number of people we had last year. We add in all the babies being born and take off the people we know have died. So births and deaths are relatively easy. There are some wrinkles, but broadly, they're the gold standard. Registration of births and deaths in the UK is a legal responsibility and it's incentivized. People want to do it. So the data is of excellent quality and it's provided to us. So that's great. We've already done 2 of the 6 boxes and we're literally only like a minute in. So it's going to be easy. Internal migration, which we'll cover next, though I accept it's not next in the order, is either pretty simple or pretty tricky to get right. So depending on how zoomed in you are on an area. If you care about the UK population as a whole, or England, Wales, Scotland, or Northern Ireland, I have great news for you. It's easy. The impact of internal migration on the UK is precisely 0, and the impact on any of the individual countries of the UK is relatively small. Below the country level, so if you're looking at local authorities, unitary authorities, health authorities, it's more difficult. But we use health registration data and data on students to estimate when people are moving, who's moving, and where they're moving to and from. But so that's 3 of our 6 boxes done, or at least talked about. And the last box, population at year t+1, that's really just the result of the others. So that's 4 of 6 done, and we're storming along. So I said about a minute ago that internal migration was either pretty easy or pretty tricky. Well, for international migration, we lose pretty easy, and we've got pretty tricky or really pretty tricky. Going into the detail about how international migration is calculated and how we know what we know is kind of beyond the scope of this. There's a seminar, another one in this series in July, which will be looking at that. But at the very highest level, we use Home Office data and Department for Work and Pensions data to spot people joining and leaving the population and to make sure that they meet our definition of people who've been here for 12 months or more. So that just leaves us with population at time t. So our population at time t is my slide not moving on. So I mentioned population at time t. This is where we start, and we have three related outputs. So the easiest of these to understand is census years. In the census years, the census gives a really good measure of the population, which we then do some additional statistical modelling to cover people who were missed from the census. And then we add on a little bit of birth, a little bit of death, a little bit of migration to get us from census in the spring up to the mid-year point. All of the estimates I'm talking about here are mid-year, so they relate to the 30th of June in the year, and that's how we calculate them. So then for other mid-year estimates, the second bullet point here, we take the census year, then we add on births, we add on deaths, add on and take away international and internal migration. Though obviously, as I said, for the UK, internal migration doesn't do anything. And that gets us our next year. And then if we need to go a further year, we add on births, take off deaths, international, internal migration, and we keep looping around until we get to the year we're interested in. This is how we produce our population estimates for a number of years and how we produce the current official mid-year estimates. A limitation of this approach, though, is that the level of uncertainty in the mid-year estimates increases as we move further and further away from the census, as we add more years and it accumulates. The last point here is the admin-based population estimates, which you might have heard, and which is our kind of future state of population estimates. They're produced using methods that build on that traditional cohort component method. So they use the same births, the same deaths, the same international and internal migration, but what they do differently is they generate a new admin base. So admin is data collected for non-statistical purposes. They build a new stock derived independently each year from administrative data, such as tax records, health records, school census. They then balance, their methods then balance the flows, so those births, deaths, migration, with the stocks, those tax records, health records, etc., to create a new population each year, which provide an improved population coverage because they can better deal with that uncertainty inherent in the individual components, and in particular, the uncertainty involved in migration flows. So that makes it sound, I would say, relatively simple, though. Obviously, it hides a vast array of complexity, but something we have additionally on that is our special populations. So special populations are kind of extra bits. So we start with our previous year population, which may be one of our census years or a rolled on mid-year estimate, but then we take out the special populations. What is a special population? Well, a special population is a group of people who don't experience demographic events, births, deaths, etc., in the normal way. So the best example of this is prisons or military bases. The prison population is not just last year's prison population a year older. You don't choose to go to prison. You don't enter or leave dependent on your age. You don't enter prison through birth. So for these populations, we take them out of our general population, as you can see with the pink arrow. We then age everyone on. The black arrow is in the middle. Everyone gets 1 year older. We add on the births. We take out the deaths, the dark blue boxes, then the impact of net migration. So that'll be inflows and outflows for the country, the region, the local authority. And then we add back in the special population. But the special population we add back in is a fresh population each year. So we don't take the prison population of last year, make everyone older. Our colleagues in Justice give us a new prison population each year. Our colleagues in Ministry of Defence and the US Armed Forces give us a separate new population each year, which we put back in because we know that those people don't experience the demographic changes in the same way. So the special population is a fresh estimate each year. So now a little bit of interactivity. So roughly what was the population of England and Wales in 2023? So we've got 50 million, 60 million or 70 million. Okay, so early 60, 70, 50. Okay, 60 is pulling away. We've got 36 responses, 48 responses, 60 what, 75? Okay, 60 million is looking strong at the moment. Okay, so thank you everyone for engaging with this. We've got a huge number of responses there. So yes, population of England and Wales in 2023 was 60.9 million. So around that 60 million. But if you said 70 million, you can also feel good. You may recognize that number because the UK population, so England, Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland, was just shy of 70 million, so 68.3 million. So you can see that England and Wales make up the majority of the UK population, but they are not the whole story. So we'll now move on. That's the population now. We'll now move on to a little bit of the longer view. So the long-term view of the population of the UK and the world can be summarised as line goes up. But that hides a rich demographic story, and I'm looking to convince you that it's a story worth paying attention to, in particular the latest chapters. So since 1879, the UK population has roughly doubled, with a couple of slight dips. So before 1911, the whole island of Ireland was included in the population. Then obviously Irish independence, Spanish flu and World War II are three dips you can see on here. But barring that, progress of UK population has been upwards at what looks like a fairly steady rate. But I said I wanted to tell you the story of the population, and stories often have more than one thread. So if we move to our next slide, we can see here it's the same, that the mid-year estimates are not just about the size of the population, they're about the structure of the population. And for that, we have a really good tool in our bag of tools. It's called the population pyramid. And they were named back when they used to look like pyramids. They show the population by age, or in this case, age group. These are 5-year age groups. And traditionally, they get thinner as the population gets older. A wide base means relatively lots of children, and a narrow top means relatively fewer old people. And what we can do with population pyramids over time is we can see age groups, see groups of people moving up, and they're replaced by smaller cohorts following them. So a cohort is just a group of people sharing a characteristic. In this case, people born in the same set of years. So I've highlighted the age 5 to 9 men and women here. In 1973, these people were aged 5 to 9. But in the next few slides, we're going to look at what happens to them over time. So on our next slide, we can see them 20 years later. So they're now aged 25 to 29. And as we saw from the earlier slide, they were the largest age group. They are still the largest age group. They've been followed by smaller cohorts of children. So there are fewer children being born for these groups. If we go forward a further 30 years, we get to 2023. So this is the most recent data provided. And this is actually a population estimate. I'm terribly sorry that I've left projection on there. That's wrong. It's an estimate. So these are estimates we've published. You can see that our people are now aged 55 to 59. So it's 50 years after we first looked at them. And it's worth considering the change in the shape of pyramid over that time. In 1973, there were about 40% more people in our 5 to 9 age group than our 55 to 59 age group. But in 2023, there were 20% more in our 55 to 59 age group. Now, that can feel a bit tricky, lots of numbers flying around there. Look at it another way. If you randomly picked 100 people from the population in 1973, 31 of them would have been aged 20 or under. Aged under 20. And 14 of them would have been aged 65 or over. But in 2023, if we picked 100 people at random, only 23 of them are aged under 20. And now 19 of them are aged 65 or over. And the other group that's really changed over that time period is what we call the oldest old, shown here as 90 and over. In 1973, there were 136 out of a population of about 56 million, so about 1 in 400. By 2023, there were 612,000 out of 68.3 million, so nearly 1 in 100, so about 4 times as many of that oldest old group. But how do we know this? How do we know that I'm not just making this up? Well, let's look then at another Slido poll. What data sources are used to estimate the population? So this is going to be word cloud. So hit me with what goes into making those numbers. We've got some typing. Census, GP registrations, census again. Census is going to be very large, I expect. GP data, births, death certificates, NHS, health, labour force survey, HESA, census. Okay, clearly we have some quite informed users here. PDS, immigration, ATA, vital statistics, death certificates. Okay, so there was no pulling the wool over your eyes. Yes, I'm seeing an awful lot of things here. So we use a vast array of sources. So you've got here data from NISRA, so our Northern Irish compatriots, Scottish Government, Welsh Government, National Records of Scotland, Home Office, NHS, HESA, Ministry of Justice. Yep, all of those. Obviously, the census is a big one that ONS produces. GP registrations, yes. Annual population survey uses data from the mid-year estimates to do things with. But yeah, a vast array. I'd say in total, there's over 20 different data sources feeding into that mid-year estimates. And so why do I think you should care? Well, population estimates underpin pretty much everything the ONS does, understanding all of our surveys and things, but they also underpin every aspect of society's lives. So schools, health, employment, transport, all of those are planned, are designed, and are resourced based on population estimates. Who is going to need them? How old are those people going to be? So a change in that population pyramid shape really helps to determine what services are going to be used where and when. And that's why the population estimates and the population projections we produce are so important. And I want to look briefly then in our next slide about the impact of those projections. So one of the key demographic challenges faced by the UK, but by effectively the whole world, is the impact of an aging population. So an aging population brings challenges. Aging population here means a larger proportion of the population being older. Here we can look at a measure called the old age dependency ratio, which underpins consideration of things like the state pension and the services we need. So without in any way being ageist, which the name can suggest, this is just looking at the number of working age people compared to the number of retirement age people. Now, this doesn't mean that retirement age people or older people can't still be working, or that younger people are definitely working. But it's a crude demographic tool that we can use to compare populations, compare areas, compare countries. And basically, as the population of the UK ages and there are fewer children being born, which are two separate but co-occurring things, there are more retirement age people to every worker. So in 2025, there were about 280 retirement age people per 1,000 working age people. And by 2075, so 50 years' time, this is projected to be just under 400 retirement age people for every 1,000 working age people. And relatively fewer working age people brings challenges of how we fund state pension and how we provide services. But my colleague Sam from DWP, who will be speaking very, very soon, is much better qualified than I to talk about that. Then the last couple of things I want to talk to you about is another challenge that we have in our data. So a key challenge is when we get new data and methods, how do we build for future methods while keeping data consistent for our users, keeping it understandable for people? An example of this is when we get new information on international migration. To accurately measure international migration, you need to understand people's behavior over a relatively long time period, so 12 months or more. But we want to produce population estimates that can be used as soon as possible. So we use the best information we can at the time for those population estimates. And then when we get more complete information, we want to, and indeed we should, revise our migration estimates so that they give the most up-to-date, accurate of international migration. But the population estimates don't always get revised at that time. We look to see what the impact is and look to try and keep our time series, consistent with methods and sources so that people can use it while giving an understandable kind of rhythm of updating with that new migration data. If we didn't draw a line in the sand and say, right, well, this is the data we're using for these estimates, then the numbers would never be done. And it'd be harder for people to use, but it's not a decision ONS makes unilaterally. we're in constant communication with our key users, and one of those key users is DWP. But the last thing I want to show you is just a little bit about kind of some of the tools you can use. So I've been throwing numbers at you, throwing information at you, but you can explore the data. It is your data. And the easiest way to understand the data really is to look at your local area, to understand what's happening where you live, where you work, where you're interested in. So on this slide, we've just got some ONS tools. And as Eleanor said, these will be sent to you after the presentation, so you can explore your local area. This is exploring Fareham, because that's where the office I work in is, but you can explore a range of things on local statistics, or create a population group profile. So look at an area you design, or look at a group of people, so a population you're interested in, and really use that to explore the data and try and get the insight, because there's so much data. We're never going to be able to pull out all the exciting stories, and that's why these tools and other tools we produce can really let you explore that data. But with that, I don't want to take up all of the time, so I think it's best if I hand over to my colleague Sam, who is one of those users I spoke about, to see how they use it.
Thank you, Ollie. Hi, I'm Sam Mould from the Demography Centre of Expertise in the Department for Work and Pensions, or DWP. I'm going to talk about how we use the population data that Ollie's just been talking about to help us understand the demographic challenges ahead, so that we can be better equipped within our department to take that into account, whether we're doing modelling and forecasting, or policy development, or operations. But first, why does DWP have a demography team? Well, we have around 20 million customers, around 30% of the population interact with us, and probably at some point in your life you will interact with DWP. So it's not surprising that demographic trends will affect us as a department. And with nearly £200 billion of spending each year, having a good knowledge about the demographic challenges ahead really matters. But before I plunge in any further, let's get you thinking about demographic data with a couple of questions. So first off, what was the UK total fertility rate in the latest year of data, which was 2023? Now up here we've got the official definition. Basically, it's roughly the total number of children per woman. So if you want to give it to one decimal place, so this is thinking about the total number of children per woman we expect people to have. I think some of you are thinking that people are having a lot of children, so I'm So the answer is 1.4 children per woman, which may surprise you if you think about looking around you about how many children people have. Did you know that the UK is now well below replacement fertility rates in terms of having the number of children which would keep the population at a stable level? And I love, there's a quote from The Economist: "In much of the world, the patter of tiny feet is being drowned out by the clatter of walking sticks." And this is an issue that we're facing along with a lot of developed countries across the world. So that's about fertility. What about life expectancy? So my next question to you is, what proportion of babies born in 2025 are expected to live till at least 100? And I'll give you a bit of extra information. In 1950, it was 3%. In 2000, it was 10%. What's your guess? We seem to be settling at around 15%. And indeed, that is the answer. 15% of babies Information about the past helps provide a basis for making predictions about the future. And when people often think about life expectancy, they think about it in the context, say, of how long their grandparents lived, but this often leads to underestimation. So the combination of low fertility and high life expectancy leads to an aging population. And this is what Ollie was talking about earlier. And this has big implications for DWP, for policy areas such as pension adequacy, are people saving enough for retirement, and the state pension age. What are my team doing with this information? Well, I wanted to talk a bit about the remit of the team that I'm in. So there's three main areas that we get involved in. Firstly, on the stakeholder side, we mostly are working with our colleagues in ONS to get the data that we need. But also we're keeping on top of academic research and working with academics to make sure that we have the latest research data as well. On the data side, we're helping our modelers and forecasters understand and use demographic data in the best way. And then on the briefing side, we're raising awareness of the demographic issues facing DWP and also providing briefing on new data sources. For example, there's been a lot of data coming out about the census recently. Now, one of the main products of the team is a short slide pack that gives an overview of the demographic challenges facing DWP. And I wanted to share some of that with you. So on this first slide, we've got some summary information about the whole population and some key facts about future trends. The headline is our population is projected to increase, driven in the short term by migration and in the long term by increasing life expectancy. Now, Ollie mentioned the old age dependency ratio, and the government faces an increasing financial burden from the increasing old age dependency ratio because this leads to higher benefit expenditure on pensioners. This is something that we need to think about to ensure that it's sustainable in the future. Ollie also showed some population pyramids earlier. And if we go to the next slide, we can see one showing the projected population. So the bars are the population in 2025, and then the line is the projected population in 2030. And we can see really clearly from this that the population is looking to age over time. You can also see some fun features such as the spike of the post-World War II baby boom, who are currently age 78. You can see that clearly in the data. Here we have a chart showing a number of past projections of the overall population. And we call this the hairy chart. And you can see why, because it's going out all over the place. And it gives a good indication of how difficult it is to predict the future. So starting on the left-hand side, in 1955, it was thought that the population would stabilise in about the low 50 millions. By the mid-1960s, massively high fertility rates, which demographers thought would continue, and so projected a big increase in the population. And it clearly shows the impact of the baby boom at the time. And they didn't know at the time that it was a short-lived spike. They had worked that out by the 1970s, and so the projections had gone back to thinking the population would stabilise, but now at around 60 million. By the mid-1990s, it was thought that the population would decrease over time, but 20 years later, increasing longevity meant that projection had completely changed again. In the latest projection, which is the solid orange line, shows a population increasing and then stabilising at around 80 million. But it's really difficult to predict. And in the following slides, when I talk more about the projections and what they mean for the department, I think it's really important to understand that Ollie said that it was a difficult job estimating the population. It's an even more difficult job projecting the population. Now, we said uncertainties are seen across successive projections, but it's also a feature within each projection. So this is a survival curve. And this shows the probability that a person will survive to a particular age, in this case, looking at current 66-year-olds. And there's a large variability in life expectancy at retirement age. For example, a quarter of men are expected to die before age 79, and a quarter live beyond 91. And uncertainty around life expectancy at retirement has implications for people thinking about how much they need to save in order to support themselves after they finish working. We looked at how projections have changed over time for the overall population, but we can look at the particular components of that separately. So this is a chart looking at the life expectancy projections. Between 1980 and 2011, life expectancy rose at an average pace close to 3 months per year, which is quite astonishing. But mortality improvements have stalled since the 2010s, and this has implications for policy areas such as state pension age. Life expectancy also took a big hit during COVID, and we're still trying to work out the long-term implications on future life expectancy. And this is an area of research where collaboration with academics is key. Fertility is falling. Some women are delaying childbearing, while others are choosing not to have children at all. Delays in childbearing may mean that people can establish themselves in a career before having children, but the widening generation gap can result in the sandwich generation, where the people looking after both children and parents, and from a DWP point of view, that has implications for labour market availability. By contrast, migration has risen hugely in the last 4 years, driven largely by an increase in non-EU immigration for study, work, particularly skilled workers in the health and care sector, and humanitarian reasons. It is projected to fall over the next few years, and the latest outturn data is showing this already. But migration is very difficult to measure, as Ollie mentioned earlier, and it's also very difficult to project. But changing patterns of migration have implications for the labour market supply. So it's something that we need to think about and try to keep on top of, looking at where we think that will go in the future. Now, for all of these areas that I've been talking about, having a good understanding of the demographic challenges ahead helps DWP to make better policy decisions to respond to the changes in the demographic landscape. Now, I finally wanted to give an example of how demographic data is used in modelling in the department. So, pension rights can take decades to accumulate, and government changes to pensions policy can take the same time frame to wash through the population. And we need a tool that can look at the long-term implications of policy changes that we might implement from both an individual and a public finance perspective. And so we have PenSim, which is a dynamic microsimulation model that simulates both private and state pension accumulation up to 2100. Now let's break that down a bit. Dynamic means that the model models changes over time. Micro means that it models changes to individuals, and simulation means that it uses probabilities to simulate changes in characteristics based on assumptions. It's been in use for the last 20 years, and it enables DWP policy analysts to improve understanding of long-term implications of both current government policy and alternative policy scenarios, enabling detailed analysis of different groups, income distributions and income sources over time. And this gives ministers the best possible information for them to make their decisions. Now, this and other DWP microsimulation models use the population estimates and projections data as a key input. Now, PenSim has provided the analysis to inform every major UK pensions policy reform in the last 2 decades. So, for example, in 2012, the government introduced automatic enrolment into the workplace pension scheme after some analysis where we looked at the prevalence of undersaving for retirement and looked at how much that could be helped by obliging employers to offer a pension scheme where employees opt out rather than opt in. Another example is in 2016, the government replaced our previous quite complicated pension system with a simpler one, taking out different single and couple rates and removing means testing. In 2023, we had a state pension age review where Pension was used to analyse the impacts of increasing state pension age at different rates to respond to the ageing population. And in all of these examples, which we're using the population estimates and projections as a key input into them, we were able to compare the new policy against the existing policy and look at the impact both on public finances and individuals with detailed analysis of how it affected different groups. And I have to say, DWP are among the world leaders in this type of modelling. Hopefully that has given you a bit of a flavour of what population data can be used for, and I'll now hand back to Eleanor for questions.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Sam, and thank you so much, Ollie, for the insights into your work. We're now going to move on to the Q&A section. I'm just going to say I do apologise for the Slido question that it didn't pick up a decimal point, so people weren't saying that women are having 24 children, although that would be impressive. So we're just going to move on to the Q&A section. Thank you to those who have put questions through. We've got an awful lot to get through, so we've got about 20 minutes for questions. If we don't get to your question today, you can always get in touch with engagement.hub@ons.gov.uk and we will answer your question that way. So let's have a look at some questions. Okay, so the top one is ONS states that its population projections are not forecasts or predictions. What is the difference between a projection and a forecast?
Yep, so this one probably for me. So at its simplest, forecast is us saying we think that this is going to happen in the future because things are happening. Our projections are projections saying in the last 5 years, 10 years, whatever, this is what's happened to births or migration or deaths. If those trends continue, this is what will happen in the future. So we're not saying it will happen. If the future is like the past, that's what would happen. What it doesn't do, and the big difference between a forecast and a projection, is if the government announced a new policy, we don't take that into account with the projections. A forecast might say, this has been announced, we think this will have an impact. With the projections, we just say, this is what will happen if the future continues the patterns from the past.
Lovely, thank you, Ollie. I'll go on to the next one now, which is, does your definition of working age population change with rising pension age? Might be for both of you, actually.
So I think it could go either way, but yes, yes, it does. As Sam said, our population estimates, our projections feed into considerations around things like what should the state pension age be. So where I was talking about old age dependency ratio, and the same for Sam, that will take into account changing pension ages.
Yeah, right. And just to add that Ollie was talking about the having consistency over time. We actually published, or ONS published, 2 measures of the pensioner population, which is based on current state pension age at whatever time that is, but also the age 65 plus population. So if you're wanting to compare different time periods, it gives you a consistent way of doing that.
Great, thank you both. We'll move on to the next question, which is how do you deal with people with dual nationalities and 2 passports who might split their time between 2 or more countries? So Ollie, I'll give you that, but I'm sure we'll cover that a bit more in the international migration webinar. Yeah.
So the first thing to say is that where we're talking about international migration, although we measure nationalities in terms of the population, we kind of put that to one side. So we're not, for the population estimates I was talking about, we don't care about your nationality. We care about, are you here long term or not? People with who split their time between 2 or more different countries, incredibly tricky to get the estimates there, because our sources look at activity and movements. So it's, I think, probably best left for my colleagues who are going to be talking in July about international migration, but they're a population we're aware of that are really hard, but we're not just pretending they're not there. We're working hard to make sure we've measured them in line with international definitions of usual residence.
Great, thank you. The next question is, if you remove a special population 1 year and add in a new count of the same population next year, are the prisoners from the first year not counted anywhere?
So it's a really good question. So thank you to whoever put that. So if the prisoners are in prison in the first year and in prison in the second year, they'll be in both populations. We take them out in year 1, but then our colleagues in justice give us the data and they'll still be in that population. So they would be included in both years. People who move, so were in prison in the first year and are not in prison in the second year because they've died, would be in our deaths. Because they've moved out of prison, would be included in our internal migration. So in our internal migration systems, we can see effectively reason for move, and leaving the armed forces, leaving prison are flagged in there. So we can get that information and then make sure that they're correctly put in the right pot. And pot means area, local authority.
Great, thank you. The next question is, are university students counted as part of the special population?
So they're not. In a lot of ways, it might be easier if they were. They're not. University students are a massive driver of internal migration. People going to university, leaving university. They're not treated as special population, though they get kind of special consideration. Mostly, we capture their moves through them updating their GP records when they go to university, and universities have got better at pushing people to do that. But also, we augment that. So we add to that with data from the Higher Education Statistics Agency, HESA, who tell us, or who universities report to them, we have this many people, we have these people. That gets linked to the health records, so we can see who's moved to where, and then we kind of do the inverse. When they leave university, we have some methods to try and move them back out. But university students are a tricky population to get in the right place at the right time. We get them in the right place eventually, but they're definitely a headache for some of my colleagues on the population estimates.
Thank you. The next one is the UK census too slow to reflect rapidly changing urban demographics, particularly in areas with high migration turnover?
So the census is really, really good at capturing the population for the census year, but we know that over time we get drift. So as you move away from the census year, so latest census was 2021, 22, 23, 24, you get uncertainty in each year of all of the components, but internal and international migration are the most susceptible to that. We know that the census has challenges with that, but we do know it's good for the year, and it's a really good benchmark for our statistics. So the admin-based population estimates that we're developing, that I spoke about briefly, are an attempt to try and it's not to do a census every year, but it's to use administrative data to say, what could we do in the realms of like a census? It's not a census. It's looking at using that administrative data to pull together where we think the population is. And that should make us better at keeping up with fast-paced changes. And the new data we're using, the new migration methods we're using, should be much better at capturing more rapidly where people are, where they move in, move out, and give us a much more dynamic picture of that. But it's a really good question, because it's a challenge, but I think it's a challenge the ONS is tackling head on.
Yes, absolutely. I think we can lead on to the next one then, which is, how is internal migration measured? And is there any statistics available on movement on a subnational level?
Yes, so I can answer the second bit quickly. Yes, we publish local authority to local authority moves, I believe down to single year of age. We certainly used to. Yes, actually, yes, we do. In our mid-year population estimates, in one of the tables that goes along with it, one of the very detailed ones, for anyone really interested, I think it's called MYEB2, but obviously it's signposted at the time. That gives you every area, every local authority by single year of age and sex inflows and outflows from the rest of the country, and from the other countries of the UK. So yes, how is it measured? At its most basic, when you change your address with your GP, or now with any aspect of the NHS, that generates a change of registration. And we compare this year's list of everyone's NHS numbers and where they are with last year's list of everyone's NHS numbers and where they are. And if it's different, if that location is different, obviously we do some checks, but we say, oh, well, you've moved from here to here. Now, obviously, some of those moves aren't moves there. It was different because last year you weren't born, or it's different because you've died and so we've taken you off. But basically, it's a comparison of where the health service thinks you were last year and this year, then with that student data from higher education providers put in there, and some very clever methodology to make up for where there are challenges.
That's great. Thank you, Ollie. We'll make sure we include that link to that data set as well in the follow-up email. The next one is, so far we've not talked about privacy. There's lots of very sensitive data handled. So what levels of aggregate anonymization are used?
So the ONS has very high privacy standards, I would say that, but all of the analysis I've talked about is completely de-anonymized. Is completely anonymized or de-identified. So all of the data when we're using it is just age, sex, etc. Where I was talking about linking of NHS numbers, those are not your actual NHS number. They are what's called hashed NHS numbers. So it's kind of a one-way process to change your NHS number 12345 into effectively random gobbledygook, but 12345 will always randomly gobbledygook to the same thing so that we can match them. But it's something that is the forefront of any research we do. Anything that does use sensitive data is done in our secure research environment, which is not called the secure research environment. It's it's a secure platform we use where only colleagues who have gone through security vetting are allowed to use it. Everyone has to demonstrate that they're only using it for the intended purpose, and your privacy of your data and my data is at the forefront of everything we do. So all of the population estimate stuff is a number of steps beyond any identifiable data. It's aggregates, which means we're looking at counts of just people, not any individual person.
Great, thank you, Ollie. I'd also like to say that we've added more information about anonymisation in our first webinar from this series. So if people would like to know a bit more about how our 5 safe work, then definitely have a watch of that and you can learn a bit more about it. I'll just go on to the next one, and then Sam, I'll ensure you there's one from a DWP angle too. So, we're going straight to it, Fab. So does Penson project the age those entering work now will be eligible for state pension?
So that's not really the question that it answers, but I can see where you're coming from here. What it does is allows you to change the state pension age in the model and see what impact that has. And then that information can help ministers make decisions on what the future state pension age should be.
Well, thank you. I'll go to the next one, which is, are there any big events that fluctuate or limit the mid-year estimates, e.g. November and post-Valentine's Day births?
So it's really interesting. A long while back, ONS produced what's called a heat map, which showed every day of the year. And I think it was the more orange it was, the more births there were. And you could see on that, you could see 9 months after Valentine's Day, 9 months after bank holidays, there was a spike. We don't, because we're using annual data in the mid-year estimates, that doesn't cause us any problems. Where it can cause a bit of fluctuation is if you're looking at below annual. So if you're looking at, say, quarterly population estimates, which we don't publish, but ONS has in the past, there you can see that certain times of the year the population change is not evenly spread out. So internal migration is probably the best example of this. So I said that university students cause a lot of that internal migration. So if you're looking at that by, say, month or by quarter, there's not really much happening around Christmas. You get to September, October, huge spike, because that's when everyone goes to university. And then at the end of the university term, so kind of July, August, huge spike out. But obviously more difficult because people don't have that defined date they've got to start their course. They leave their course gradually, or maybe they stay in the area they were studying in.
Excellent, thank you, Ollie.
So,
yeah,
someone has
yes, I was just about to comment that someone has helpfully added the heat map of births that's on the ONS website into the Slido. So please have a look at that if you're interested. Fab, we still got quite about 8 more minutes of questions, so we'll get a few more. So I'm not sure if you covered this, Ollie, but it just is asking, can you please recap on why prisoners are included, and if that includes those not charged but jailed?
Yes. Yeah, so our population estimates are looking to capture the whole population. So we include prisoners because they are in the population. They are currently usually resident in England and Wales for ONS's stuff. That would include where people are at the, or attempts to include people where they are at the mid-year point. So it would include those who are currently in prison if they are expected to be there for, if that's expected to be their usual place of residence. So I think that would be if they're there for 6 months or more. If they're not, then they would still be where they were before that. So most likely they would just be where, if they haven't moved, they'd be where their GP records said they were.
Okay.
But no one gets left out by accident. Everyone, so you're either in prison or you're not in prison. You're either in the armed forces or you're not in the armed forces. And yeah, we reconcile the sources against each other.
Brilliant, thank you. The next question, and it might be for both of you actually, how do you see AI having an effect on population statistics in the future, either in calculating stats or on the population as a whole?
So I think maybe, Sam, as a user of our stats, maybe you've got thoughts on how it's going to affect your work. And
well, yeah, I was thinking actually more on the production side, that in terms of the migration estimates, long-term international migration is based on people staying in the country for 12 months or more. And a lot of work has been done recently to use machine learning to take people's intentions about whether they're going to stay for 12 months or more at the point that they enter the country into more accurate estimates of how that relates to whether they have stayed for 12 months or more, and that's really improved the accuracy of the migration data, and we can see that feeding through into the population estimates and then the projections, which then of course feed through into all of our modelling. So we're very grateful for all the work that you've done with that.
I'd love to take credit, but that's colleagues in other bits of ONS. But yeah, it's a really interesting area, and I think, like a lot of government, we're looking carefully at what can be done. How can we use this in a way that helps us and helps you as the public to use our data in the best way? So I think my job will probably look different in 10 years because of AI. I'd be a fool to try and predict how it would look different.
Yeah, definitely. There's definitely work going on ensuring that we keep that human in the loop. So we did do another webinar. I'm plugging the series throughout this, but we did do another webinar in January about AI and machine learning that's going on in ONS at the moment. So that person who submitted that question, if you are interested, please have a look on YouTube. I'll take a few more. So do you have any way of modelling the impact of subnational projections from large housing developments?
So, where I said earlier about the difference between projections and forecasts, so our projections don't take this into account. However, work is being done in ONS, and I know because my team are doing some of it, on looking at what would a projection look like that did try and bring in some of that information on planned housing developments or housing targets, and how would that affect subnational estimates and projections. I want to be really clear. It's not going to be anything official soon. It is something we're looking at to try and understand what could we do to balance what people are really interested in against not forecasting. But so we might be able to do some kind of variant of, if you assume that this housing data is a good predictor of that population data, this is what it would look like with publicly available data. But it's a really interesting area, and one that I'm keen to keep my team working on, but it's nothing official yet, nothing that I could point to.
Okay, thank you, Ollie. I'll go on to the next one, which is, are you able to count homeless people?
So yes, they are. So they'd be included in our census count. So a lot of work was done around the census and all censuses, I suppose, around capturing that kind of marginalized population, homeless people, that kind of thing. Then, so they will be in the population. Where it's more difficult is getting location right, because they may well not be engaging with sources like the health services, or might not be engaging in a way we would expect. So getting their location right is tricky, but again, it's something we're aware of and try and deal with. And obviously, if they were to sadly die, they would be included in those death statistics. But yeah, so they are included. We work around censuses particularly to make sure we're capturing everyone. But yes, they're a difficult population to get in the right place at the right time, because there's no obligation to tell any part of government that you have moved.
Yeah, thank you, Ollie. Also, Debbie, we do also publish statistics on homelessness in the UK. So that is individuals who are reaching out to their local authority to help if you are interested. I think we published our latest release about 2 weeks ago. So that would be on the ONS website as well if you're interested in that. I will take two more and then we will wrap it. So you sometimes see claims that the UK population is higher than estimated based on looking at supermarket or sewage data. Do you ever look at this?
So I'll preface this by saying I've not been involved in the work. I know that work has gone on with my colleagues to look at alternative data sources that could give us insight into maybe we've missed people, maybe we're missing growth or changing populations. The way our mid-year estimates work is we really want to be able to apply methods consistently. So we really need data that we can use consistently across the country, so that we're not just, as far as possible, we're avoiding making changes for this area because of that bit of data, or this area because of that bit of data. So it has been looked at, and I'm sure colleagues on the research side are looking at it more as time goes on. The more data we can bring in, the better, and our admin-based estimates bring in a really wide range of sources. So it may well be that is part of the plan to look at, but I don't know exactly how that would be incorporated. But yeah, it's again a really interesting potential data source.
Great, thank you, Ollie. I think I'm going to leave it there for questions, but we've had so many. Thank you so much for submitting those. Just to say thank you again, thank you so much to Ollie and Sam for your presentations. It's been really interesting. Before we close, we'd just like to mention that we do have more events coming up in the Bring Data to Life series. So as Ollie mentioned, we've got migration happening in July, and then we've got GDP in September. So you can go to the Eventbrite page or scan the QR code that's on your screen now. Just to mention again that all of these webinars are free to join and will be recorded, so don't worry if you miss it. But lastly, we'd just like to welcome you to share some feedback of how you found today's event. This can be done by going over to the Slido page that you've been using throughout. It's just a quick survey, and we'll also send you the link once we've finished. But thank you once again to our speakers, and see you next time. Thank you all.